Hey everybody, welcome to another weekly video. Recently we talked about the collection of songs that could potentially make up new releases, insiders releases, and I have a couple of candidates too, in fact, to be sort of our first possible releases. One of them is a brand new tune. Based on comments and feedback I got, I heard some people say they wanted to see some new stuff, so I'd like to put that out. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how the song was written. In this case, though, the song happened through kind of a unique process, and to put some context around that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how songs get written in general. So this sort of falls into a category of videos that I call Infraart, which is all about the process of creating stuff. In my case, a song being finished, that is performable or recordable, basically means having three things. It means the song has a melody, it means the song has some kind of lyrics, and it means the song has some kind of chord base. Now there are special cases, of course. There are instrumentals which lack lyrics, there are a cappella pieces which sometimes don't need the chords behind them, but for most of the material that I have, all three of these things have to be complete in order for the song to be done. So when a song is being written, it tends to take a path that wanders through these three spaces. And as it gets finished, each one of these things kind of grows to completion. So over the years of looking at these song paths and categories, I've noticed patterns, and for the purpose of the video here, I've tried to give them names. So the first one I'll talk about is what I've called message, meaning that the song has some kind of message or mission behind it. In this case, there's usually a snippet of either lyrics or melody that kind of kicks things off. It can be very tiny. It can be just a couple of lines or an idea or some kind of a concept of what the song is about. But that seed kind of grows with the lyrics and the melody playing off of each other until a section of the song starts to get written. And that growth happens, and then at some point we then go to the instrument to try to put chords behind it. Now, when that transition happens can be different. Sometimes lyrics and melody for the entire song are written before we ever get to the point where we're starting to look at the chords for it. Sometimes, however, this section can sort of get done with just piece of a song, like a verse or a chorus. Sometimes it's even the bridge, the middle part, that gets written first. And then when we make the transition to try putting chords behind that, that chord progression then feeds back into larger ideas. It's kind of like once you get the chords for the bridge done, it kind of suggests some chords for a verse. And then you kind of go back to this process and you start cycling to put a verse together. The second category is a category I call noodling, because it starts with noodling around on the instrument, right? Pick up a guitar, play around with an idea, play around with some chords, play around with a fragment of a lick, and that generates sort of the musical background part first. While you're playing around with the chord progression, then sometimes a melody comes to mind. So the chord progression tends to lead to the melody, and then the melody can then lead to the lyrics. In this case, this is more of an improvisatory process. So as you're jamming on a riff, you kind of come up with a melody, and then as you're la-la-laing your way through the melody, you kind of come up with a fragment of lyrics. Sometimes what the song ends up being about is driven entirely by those first few lyrics that come along, and then that seeds an idea for a concept, and then the song goes forward from there. The next category is kind of a hybrid of the last two, so I nicknamed it Messdling. It's sort of part message and part noodling. In that case, a song starts out with some kind of a seed that is either a fragment of lyric or sometimes a fragment of melody, one or the other, or sometimes a little bit of both, but then immediately proceeds into, let's try to put some kind of chords or structure behind this. Once that happens, as that structure is formed, it feeds back into more lyrics and more melody. So the growth process now is all three of those things kind of growing at once. It starts out with that little bit of message, but then is built by the noodling improv process, and that brings eventually the whole tune together. The last category is a case where really the lyrics are driving. In a case like that, the lyrics are written either a whole big chunk or maybe even the whole song written entirely at once. And then from there, it either goes to reading through those lyrics, coming up with a melody for it, something starts to stick, and then you go to putting chords behind that. Or the lyrics are kind of jammed over the instrument, played around with pieces, and then you kind of improv a melody off of that. So it can kind of go one way or the other. But it all starts in this case with lyrics, and there have been songs where a whole song or a whole big chunk of a song just gets written first. Sometimes when the lyrics are being written, there's an implied rhythm. There's kind of something that sort of gives a sense of maybe what the rough beat of the song is. Is it going to be in 4? Is it going to be in 6? Is it going to be upbeat? Is it going to be a ballad? But it doesn't really take shape until either that melody or that chord progression gets this process started, and then the growth happens between those two. So, of course, being the engineer, I went back through my list of songs and tried to remember how many of them sort of followed each type of process and get a feeling for which ones are most common, which ones are less common. So I came up with some very rough statistics on this. So out of the 55-ish songs that have been written to date, the first of them sort of don't even apply to this process. I'd say about 15%. Those are special cases. Songs that are instrumentals, songs that are a cappella pieces, songs that came out of some other kind of process, some kind of exception to the rule, so to speak. So I'm kind of taking those off the top. The ones that kind of fell into the message category looked like it was a little bit less than a fifth, maybe about 18%. Slightly less common were the noodling songs, where I actually started on the instrument and then went from there. The songs that were kind of a hybrid between these two processes, where there was some sort of a seed, but then I improvised on the instrument to grow upon that, those are a little bit less common, came up to about 13%. And the ones where large chunks of lyrics were done first, or the whole song was written as a lyrical piece and then set to music later, that was also about the same, in this case about 14%. These are very rough estimates. For those who are doing the math, you'll notice that these don't add up to 100. Believe it or not, about 25%, the remaining percentage of songs, I looked back and could not remember really how they got written. That actually kind of happens a lot with me. But what's really interesting, though, is that when I look at the Noodling and Messdling processes that involve that improv aspect, that instrument, sitting with the instrument aspect, those tend to be weighted towards older songs. Noodling in particular is really interesting. The newest song that could have potentially fallen into this category based on my vague memory was As the Crow Flies, which was probably written in about 2009. If you don't count that one, it's more likely goes all the way back to Chasing the Storm, which is the first track on Drowning in Sky. That song was written in 2000. Most of the other songs that fall into this category, all of them actually, go back way before that into some of the early stuff that was released on Revolutions and Perform with North back in the 90s. So what's really interesting about this is that this noodling process, which is clearly not something I've been leaning on much in the past 10, maybe 15 years, is exactly the process that led to this new tune, this song that is one of the two candidates for this month's Insiders release. And that is a story that I'd like to tell in another video real soon. So, thank you for watching and see you next week.